Ex-CIA officer confirms alien tech is 1,000 years ahead. The technology we're dealing with, the man says, his voice oddly calm for something so extraordinary, is at least 1,000 years ahead of anything we have. He leans back, the camera catching the faint reflection of a government seal behind him. And it's not from us. That moment spread across the internet in hours, but to some insiders, it wasn't a surprise. It was confirmation. Because for decades, government scientists and defense contractors have quietly tried to engineer the impossible. Craft that can accelerate from 0 to hypersonic speeds without wings, exhaust, or sound. No burning fuel, no visible thrust. Just a silent blur moving faster than physics should allow. Every attempt to imitate it ends the same way. Confusion, failure, and more classified folders disappearing into vaults. Here's the tension. Everything we've built follows the limitations of Newton and Einstein. Our technology depends on combustion, friction, and measurable forces. But these unknown craft ignore all that, moving as if gravity itself bends to them. Every law we use to keep planes in the air just doesn't apply. So where did this knowledge come from, and who's speaking up about it now? Two names keep surfacing: John Ramirez, an ex-CIA officer who's become unexpectedly candid about non-human intelligence, and Luis Elizondo, the man who led the Pentagon's secret UFO program known as AATIP. They come from totally different corners of US intelligence, yet their testimonies somehow fit together like matching puzzle pieces. Ramirez suggests there's already a government timetable for revealing the truth. He claims something significant could happen around 2027. Elizondo, meanwhile, points to physical evidence the military's been quietly studying for years: materials, sensors, and radar data that simply don't line up with any Earth-made technology. Think about that. Two former insiders, both risking careers and reputations, describing technology vastly superior to our own, yet both insisting it's real, not myth. Whether they're right or not, they're telling parallel stories that suggest a single ongoing operation, one to study non-human technology, and another to slowly prepare the public for what it means. To grasp why these claims matter, it helps to start with the evidence that forced even hardened skeptics to pay attention: the recordings that caught the impossible on military equipment. Footage known today by names like Tic Tac, Gimbal, and Go Fast. In those clips, advanced fighter pilots swear they witnessed craft dodging radar lock and changing direction instantly, something no known jet could do. The US Navy verified those videos as authentic, and the Pentagon confirmed they were, in fact, unidentified aerial phenomena. These weren't hoaxes. They weren't special effects. They were seen by trained observers, tracked on multiple systems, and logged in Defense Department reports. Now here's the promise of this story. By the end, you'll understand why people like Ramirez and Elizondo insist that alien, or at least non-human, technology isn't just real but thousands of years beyond us. You'll see how government scientists have struggled for decades to replicate something that defies our understanding of propulsion, inertia, and space-time itself. And you'll see why, if these insiders are telling the truth, our world has already brushed against a future we were never supposed to touch. Because the question isn't just whether the technology exists. It's whether we've been living next to it all along. When the impossible was recorded, it started with a radar blip that made no sense at all. An object moving 60 miles in less than a second. The date was November 14, 2004. Off the coast of San Diego, members of the US Navy's Carrier Strike Group were running a routine training exercise. But as the radar officers recalibrated their systems, they realized the target wasn't a glitch. It was something real, descending from 60,000 feet to near sea level almost instantly. Commander David Fravor, a decorated Navy pilot, was sent to check it out. What he saw would later ignite one of the most credible UAP cases ever documented. Below his F/A-18 Super Hornet, hovering just above the ocean, was an object shaped like a smooth white pill. No wings, no markings, and no visible means of propulsion. It darted around like it was alive, changing direction in ways that made the air itself seem irrelevant. Fravor tried to engage, but before his aircraft could close in, the object shot off, gone in a blink. When they returned to the carrier, the radar crew was stunned. The same object had reappeared 60 miles away, at the precise coordinates where the pilots were instructed to regroup. In debrief, Fravor described it as like nothing I've ever seen. This wasn't a random witness or internet clip. It came from the Navy's own radar systems, later confirmed as authentic by the Department of Defense. The infamous Tic Tac video, publicly released years later, showed the same encounter captured on advanced infrared targeting pods. No wings, no exhaust, just a cold, oval shape accelerating beyond anything our aircraft can reach. Now, here's where the story deepens. Around the same time, other fighter pilots captured similar footage. In 2015, the Navy recorded 2 more encounters, Go Fast and Gimbal. Different flights, different sensors, but the same pattern. Objects accelerating, hovering, and maneuvering with complete disregard for inertia. In one clip, the target seems to jolt sideways faster than any jet can physically handle. The pilots' voices, caught on the recording, show a mix of disbelief and laughter. Because what else can you do when the impossible happens on your own targeting screen? Dude, one says, look at that thing, it's rotating. And indeed, the object in the gimbal video seems to pivot midair, as if it's controlled by fields instead of aerodynamics. These were trained observers, flying some of the most advanced aircraft on Earth. They know optical illusions, atmospheric distortions, and equipment errors. But this wasn't that. Multiple radar systems, long-range cameras, and the pilot's own eyes all agreed. The craft were solid, fast, and operating in ways that our propulsion physics can't reproduce. Let's break down why this is so alarming for scientists and engineers. When an aircraft moves, it has to push against something: air, gravity, friction. Every bit of speed costs enormous energy. The Tic Tac didn't follow those rules. It produced no heat signature consistent with propulsion, made no sonic boom crossing Mach limits, and apparently handled G-forces that would liquefy human pilots. One analysis estimated maneuvers exceeding 14,000 GS, while modern fighters start breaking apart near 10. So if it wasn't using air for lift, and it wasn't expelling fuel for thrust, what kept it moving? Researchers inside and outside the Pentagon started exploring ideas that sound like science fiction. Gravitational field manipulation, plasma envelopes, space-time distortion. Yet even the most optimistic physicists admit, if this is real, it's way past anything humans can engineer. Which is exactly why officials created the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or AATIP, years before the videos went public. Pilots like Fravor became reluctant heroes. For years, they stayed quiet, worried that speaking out would wreck their careers. Nobody wanted to be the UFO guy in the Navy. But after Elizondo helped push the videos into the open, that old stigma started to break. These weren't random lights in the sky anymore. They were measured, documented, and logged in defense archives. The impossible had names, coordinates, and timestamps. Ask radar technicians who worked those missions. They'll say the same thing. Whatever those objects were, they weren't storms, birds, or sensor reflections. The radar literally locked on. The blips weren't ghosts. One technician later told investigators he watched similar objects appear almost daily during that training phase. They'd show up on scope, hover for hours, and vanish at supersonic speeds. Every recalibration confirmed the same readings. From the outside, skeptics argue human error or misinterpretation. But to those who saw it firsthand, the experience redefined the limits of flight itself. One physicist involved in analyzing the records compared the Tic Tac's movements to a car moving from 0 to 12,000 miles per hour in less than a second. If you tried that with known materials, the craft, and the pilot, would disintegrate instantly. The implications go beyond military curiosity. These encounters mean that something in our atmosphere, or near it, is operating technology far beyond known propulsion systems. It's not Russian or Chinese. The data from multiple allies show similar patterns across decades, synchronized and global. Whatever it is, it's been here for a while. The public only learned about these videos years later, after persistent leaks, freedom of information requests, and insider testimony. The Pentagon eventually confirmed their authenticity, but avoided any claim about origin. They simply said, unidentified aerial phenomena. The label said nothing, and yet admitted everything. It left open the possibility that something non-human was demonstrating capabilities we couldn't match. Now think about what that means inside classified research circles. Engineers are trained to break problems down into physics, materials, and power equations. But if you show them a craft that ignores inertia, there's no reference point. The math falls apart. That's why, for years, small research teams inside defense contractors have reportedly tried to replicate what they call lift anomalies. Every attempt fails the same way. No method to generate sustained, reactionless propulsion. The frustration is palpable in Declassified memos. They want to understand, but there's nothing to dissect. No debris, no recovered tech that's officially acknowledged. Which raises an uncomfortable point. If the government truly has nothing, then these craft are operating freely in restricted airspace, outperforming everything we have, without detection until they choose to be seen. And if we do have pieces, well, that opens a much larger story, one that insiders like Ramirez and Elizondo hint may already be unfolding behind locked doors. Either way, that November day in 2004 set a precedent. The impossible wasn't a claim, it was recorded, and it kick-started a chain reaction inside the intelligence world. Suddenly, people who'd spent careers laughing off UFO chatter started taking quiet meetings, comparing radar logs, whispering about propulsion systems long listed as theoretical only. Because once those videos surfaced, one truth became unavoidable. Something not built by us was flying rings around our best pilots. And from that moment on, impossible stopped being a defense. The former CIA officer speaks. You've heard the pilots. You've seen the footage. But the strangest claims didn't start in a cockpit. They came from inside the intelligence community itself. And one of the first people to break that silence was a man named John Ramirez. Ramirez isn't just another talking head making wild statements online. He spent more than 2 decades in the US intelligence world, much of it inside the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. His job involved assessing capabilities of foreign aerospace systems, satellites, radars, weapons platforms. The kind of work that requires both technical knowledge and tight-lipped discipline. For years, he lived by the agency's rule of silence. Then, after retiring, he started appearing in public forums, discussion panels, and podcasts, saying things that stunned even long-time UFO researchers. He didn't classify himself as a whistleblower. He said he wasn't revealing state secrets. He was connecting dots from his career and what's already public. The most jarring dot came in 2022, when Ramirez suggested that within certain government circles, analysts had been briefed to anticipate a contact event or revelation of non-human intelligence around 2027. He never claimed to know the exact nature of this arrival, just that agencies appeared to be preparing people internally, so the shock wouldn't be total when information came out. That statement alone detonated across online communities. Some dismissed it outright. Others noticed something strange. A few of his details lined up with subtle changes in federal policy. Around the same time, UFO terminology was being officially replaced with UAP. Intelligence reports about anomalous craft were mandated by Congress. Public hearings popped up for the first time in 50 years. If Ramirez was delusional, those coincidences were oddly convenient. When pressed about where his information came from, Ramirez was careful. He often said he'd attended classified briefings that touched on non-human technology, but claimed none of his comments breached clearance rules. Instead, he hinted that the story was bigger than extraterrestrials. It was about how certain departments within government interpret humanity's place in the cosmos. He talked about intelligences that predate modern civilization, language vague enough to stay safe but enough to keep listeners hooked. Some of his remarks drifted far beyond what skeptics could tolerate. In a now infamous interview, he discussed alleged reptilian or hybrid entities referenced in obscure CIA materials from the Cold War era. Was he serious or just speaking metaphorically about classification types? Even supporters weren't sure. But what made Ramirez fascinating wasn't the shock value, it was his credibility. He looked and sounded like an analyst, composed, articulate, constantly reminding listeners that speculation shouldn't replace data. Those who worked with him describe a man obsessed with precision. It's partly why, when he spoke about non-human intelligence, he did so in a strangely bureaucratic way. He didn't say aliens or beings from another world. He said entities of non-human origin interacting with humanity. It's the language of briefings, the kind you'd use when discussing something you can't fully explain, but can't ignore either. Critics call him a master of ambiguity, just enough insider flavor to imply authority, just vague enough to avoid prosecution for classified leaks. Maybe that's true, but supporters see it differently. They believe Ramirez represents a new phase of disclosure. Officials gradually normalizing a reality long kept hidden, by speaking in half measures to prepare the public mind. If that's what's happening, he might be one of several mid-level former insiders acting as messengers on behalf of a quiet consensus forming inside the government. That total secrecy isn't sustainable anymore. Then there's the 2027 date. He repeated it more than once, claiming certain agencies treat it as a milestone for what he called acclimatization. The idea is simple: inform the public slowly, through safe discussions and small revelations, until they won't panic when undeniable evidence finally surfaces. It sounds conspiratorial, yet you can trace a pattern: videos declassified, hearings televised, new terms introduced, biological materials mentioned in congressional drafts. Each step makes the extraordinary feel slightly more ordinary. So is Ramirez sharing future knowledge, or just interpreting bureaucratic drift as prophecy? He's never offered hard proof: no documents, no recordings, only his conviction and resume. But when someone with his background starts speaking so freely, intelligence watchers take note. After all, former agency officials rarely court this level of attention without permission or plausible deniability planned from the start. He often returns to one message: humanity isn't ready. In one interview, he said, "If the reality were made public all at once, our institutions, science, religion, government wouldn't survive the shock." That line sums up his warning. Disclosure, to him, isn't just about revealing technology. It's about preparing civilization for a rethink of existence itself. He believes the line between human and non-human has blurred for much longer than we realize. At times he sounds more philosopher than spy. He references mythology, ancient texts, even genetics, suggesting that ancient encounters might not be stories but records of earlier contact cycles. To his detractors, that's pseudoscience. To his followers, it's validation: a man with security training daring to link ancient accounts to modern data. And yet, through all his speculation, one theme keeps coming back: the sense of deliberate timing. He implies events follow a schedule, not random leaks. That agencies coordinate information release through congressional pipelines, scientific partnerships, and entertainment media to shift perception step by step. Whether intentional or coincidental, it's hard to ignore how normalized UAP discussion has become since voices like his stepped forward. But there's another reason his claims matter beyond the strange predictions. They give us a glimpse of how intelligence officers think about secrecy. To an agency analyst, classified information isn't just knowledge, it's a power asset. How and when it's revealed can influence society, politics, even markets. If some version of crash retrieval or advanced craft research truly exists, managing that narrative would be as valuable as the technology itself. Ramirez never says he's seen the hardware. He frames himself as a conduit between worlds, the one still bound by non-disclosure, and the one hungry for truth. When asked if physical artifacts or biological evidence actually exist, he deflects. Some people inside know more than others, but preparation goes beyond material. It's psychological. That phrase, psychological preparation, shows how he views disclosure less as revelation and more as calibration of belief. Still, he's careful to note that everything he says is his personal opinion. It's a legal shield, but also a hint that much remains unspeakable. And this is where his story links to someone else, Luis Elizondo, the Pentagon insider who ran the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. While Ramirez hinted from the sidelines, Elizondo was in the ring, studying the phenomena from within. Because if Ramirez represents the philosophical side of the mystery, Elizondo brought the operational one. And his journey picked up exactly where Ramirez's warnings left off, inside the most secretive corridors of the Department of Defense. Luis Elizondo and the secrets of AATIP. When Luis Elizondo first spoke publicly, he didn't sound like a believer. He sounded like a man who'd seen something that refused to fit inside his training manuals. Before 2017, almost nobody outside defense circles had ever heard his name. Inside, though, he was known as a program director who handled unconventional aerospace threats, the kind of vague title that keeps any curious journalist chasing dead ends. That program was called AATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and its existence alone raised questions Congress wasn't ready to answer. AATIP wasn't born out of curiosity, it was born out of fear. After those strange encounters off California and the East Coast, certain Pentagon officials wanted to understand what our pilots were facing. Elizondo was given the uncomfortable job: investigate unidentified craft that seemed to outperform human technology by orders of magnitude. The catch? Do it in virtual secrecy, with a budget smaller than most aircraft maintenance contracts, and report only to people with enough clearance to even swallow the results. Inside that tiny office, the team gathered footage, radar logs, and pilot interviews. They analyzed performance data using experts from the Navy and Defense Intelligence Agency. What they saw forced them to expand their vocabulary. These things weren't behaving like enemy weapons. They were behaving like physics experiments in motion. Instant acceleration, angles of travel impossible to replicate, propulsion signatures that didn't match any known form of jet, rocket, or plasma engine. Every measurement shredded conventional models. To avoid ridicule, they stopped using the word UFO. They called them anomalous aerial vehicles. Still, the implication hung in the air. Whatever these were, they could outfly anything built by humans. Elizondo began pushing for higher-level attention, insisting the threat, whether foreign or not, was real. His memos emphasized national security, but privately, he admits what really haunted him were the performance metrics. He'd been trained to rule out fantasy. Now he was staring at data that wasn't fantasy, but also wasn't human. The deeper he dug, the stranger it became. Contractors mentioned materials, not from any known commercial origin. Some samples appeared layered at microscopic levels, impossible to replicate with current metallurgy. The lab results hinted at isotopic ratios that didn't occur naturally on Earth. None of this was demonstrated as alien. It was simply unexplainable. Pentagon scientists filed the findings away, often labeling them anomalous metamaterials, a bureaucratic phrase designed to bury significance under terminology. At one point, AATIP analysts tried to simulate one of the craft's movements using existing propulsion theory. The equations broke down. The power required exceeded the energy output of entire countries. The only logical conclusion was that these craft weren't using traditional fuel or lift. Something else was manipulating mass or gravity itself. Elizondo later compared it to pulling space-time toward you rather than pushing yourself through it. It's the kind of line physicists debate for years but can't verify because the source data remains classified. Some colleagues thought the real breakthrough wouldn't come from propulsion at all, but from understanding how the unidentified craft interacted with the medium around them. Radar data hinted at distortions in air density, maybe even fluctuations in electromagnetic fields preceding their movement. If true, that suggested they were changing the environment itself, a sort of localized warp bubble. The mathematics for that concept exist in theory under general relativity, but generating it would require energy levels bordering on science fiction. So AATIP turned to fringe physics for inspiration. Zero-point energy, quantum vacuum fluctuations, the extraction of usable force from the structure of space itself. Elizondo didn't claim to prove those models. They were more like reference tools, desperate attempts to map the unmappable. He once said privately that the technology, whatever its origin, was at least a millennium beyond what we can reproduce without rewriting physics. That phrase, 1,000 years ahead, would later echo through interviews and headlines, though he never claimed alien origin outright. He only said, "Not ours." Behind closed doors, those conclusions caused friction. Some Pentagon leaders saw AATIP as chasing science fiction while wasting defense funds. Others thought the discoveries might point to breakthroughs worth guarding for weapons research. The internal tug-of-war eventually forced Elizondo into a choice: stay silent inside the system or go public. In 2017, frustrated by what he described as bureaucratic indifference, he resigned. Days later, the New York Times published the first mainstream acknowledgement of AATIP's existence and released the Navy videos that shook public perception. For the first time in decades, the US government officially admitted it didn't know what something was. After retiring, Elizondo joined Tom DeLonge's group to the Stars Academy, a blend of entertainment label and research company that aimed to push disclosure further. Many criticized that move as opportunistic, but Elizondo claimed it was the only platform willing to release evidence legally. Through those partnerships, 3 key military videos went public, footage that forced the Pentagon to admit authenticity years later. It was his quiet rebellion, use openness as defense. Still, there's a darker layer few outside his circle discuss. Elizondo hinted that parts of the government maintain special access programs dealing with recovered materials, crash retrievals locked away under contractor oversight. He never confirmed possession. He only said, certain people have access to things that would change your understanding of reality. That cryptic phrasing caused endless speculation. Some former colleagues say he deliberately used vagueness as armor. Others think it was a warning that the real evidence is too dangerous for open release. Inside engineering circles, whispers followed. Defense labs allegedly examined small fragments. a metallic compound showing self-healing surface tension, or isotopic layering suggesting isotopic modification at atomic scales. Those samples, according to sources, never behaved predictably. Energy readings fluctuated, as if the material interacted with electromagnetic fields in ways they didn't understand. After months of study, each project hit the same conclusion: insufficient data, unknown composition. The reports vanished into classified channels, never acknowledged again. When questioned publicly, Elizondo sticks to what he can verify. He talks about radar returns, eyewitness testimony, and the pattern of government behavior. What he doesn't say directly says even more. He often repeats, "We may not be alone, but what matters is understanding what's on our skies now." It's a measured phrasing that walks the line between warning and disclosure. His belief is that secrecy no longer serves national security. In interviews, he compares the current climate to early nuclear research. "Once we saw splitting the atom was possible, we couldn't uninvent it. The same goes for this. Someone's already using it. We need to understand it before someone uses it against us." To him, the threat isn't necessarily extraterrestrial. It's the danger of ignorance, facing technology beyond comprehension without preparation. Since his resignation, Elizondo's life shifted from intelligence briefings to global stages. Congressional staffers invite his testimony. Pilots thank him for legitimizing what they saw. Yet the cost is high. He's endured personal investigations, professional isolation, even attempts to discredit his credentials. But despite all that, he continues speaking, framing AATIP not as a failure, but as a warning label attached to the unknown. He's careful with predictions, unlike Ramirez. While Ramirez talks of timetables and arrivals, Elizondo focuses on evidence, the tangible signs that our skies host something extraordinary. But the gulf between their tones doesn't separate them, it completes the story. Ramirez points to the timing, Elizondo provides the proof. And somewhere between their testimonies lies the possibility that both are describing different faces of the same phenomenon. Because if AATIP really did uncover glimpses of engineering centuries ahead of us, then the question isn't whether it's real. The question is when we'll finally admit it. And if those materials truly exist, locked away behind layers of secrecy, they might be the closest humanity has ever come to touching physics from another world. Inside the alleged crash retrieval program. The phrase crash retrieval sounds like something pulled from a science fiction novel, but within defense circles, it's whispered as if it's real policy. The story goes that over the decades, fragments, sometimes entire craft, have been recovered from incidents the public never heard about. Whether you believe that or not, enough credible voices have referenced such programs that it's no longer easy to dismiss as rumor. The pattern starts in the 194s. Right after the Roswell incident, internal memos described recovered materials of unknown origin. Officially they were weather balloons, yet every new whistleblower since seems to echo the same core story: that remnants of non-human craft were quietly transported to military bases and then divided among private contractors for analysis. The idea was simple: bury the evidence in layers of corporate secrecy where freedom of information laws couldn't reach. Take Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Long before Area 51 became internet legend, technicians there reportedly analyzed wreckage composed of ultra-thin metallic foil that wouldn't crease and return to shape when bent. In later years, almost identical descriptions surfaced from defense researchers allegedly examining metamaterials with unknown isotopic ratios. When journalists requested samples, they were told none existed. Still, each decade another scientist hints at having handled something extraordinary once. Fast forward to the Cold War. Military test sites across Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico became hubs for aerospace experimentation. Engineers who later joined major contractors like Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman sometimes recall special projects requiring classified rooms inside already secure facilities. One aeronautical engineer interviewed before his death said he was shown an alloy so resistant to heat it remained cold to the touch even under direct torch flame. He never knew where it came from, only that it arrived labeled foreign material, non-terrestrial specifications. That phrasing was never explained. There are consistent details: materials with microscopic layering, isotopic compositions that don't match natural Earth values, and surface tensions that seem to heal after being cut. Of course, skeptics say these stories exaggerate experimental composites developed under black budget programs, things like advanced titanium laminates or shape memory alloys. And maybe that's what they were. But it's strange how many of those experimental materials never appeared in any known weapons project afterward, despite being decades ahead of their time. Every recovered fragment supposedly passed through several hands: military custodians, private labs, then into vaults under special access program control. Scientists often worked blind, unaware of the full origin. They'd get a sample labeled with a numeric code, run spectral analyses, report anomalies, and lose access the next week. One metallurgist described publishing a paper on a highly unusual bismuth magnesium compound only to have his data seized under a national security order. He never saw it again. The secrecy got so intense that even high-clearance Pentagon units stopped sharing results. Insiders claim entire retrieval divisions operated under contractor management, allowing the Department of Defense to deny possession while still benefiting from research. One former intelligence official likened it to the Manhattan Project's compartmentalization. Each team built a brick. Nobody saw the wall. According to certain claims, at least a handful of intact craft were recovered globally. Not just crash fragments, but technology that appeared to survive intact. Multiple countries reportedly exchanged data under back-channel agreements. Countries with limited budgets but unique discoveries traded information for American protection. None of it ever entered mainstream aerospace development, suggesting either the objects couldn't be reverse-engineered or that successes were too disruptive to release publicly. Witnesses from inside contractor programs talk about working with materials that emitted faint electromagnetic fields, detectable only by sensitive instruments. Others mention transparent panels that refracted light oddly, as if bending it around edges. In one account, technicians reportedly placed a coin on a curved plate, and the coin seemed slightly displaced, like reality itself had shifted. No replication ever succeeded outside controlled rooms. Whether these were genuine non-human artifacts or advanced experiments remains unproven, but the consistency between stories across decades is hard to ignore. Official denial remains absolute. The Air Force says no debris of extraterrestrial origin has ever been recovered. Yet the government continues to fund studies labeled with phrases such as exotic metamaterials and advanced propulsion system assessment. In 2021, declassified reports from AATIP's successor mentioned retrieval and analysis of unidentified material. The documents didn't say what the materials were, only that their characteristics were not fully understood. It's bureaucratic understatement at its finest. If such objects exist, it's logical that reverse engineering would begin immediately. You'd start with structural composition, then energy source, finally control mechanisms. But the accounts suggest failure at the first step. Scientists couldn't reproduce the alloys or even determine their manufacturing method. Microscopic analysis allegedly showed isotopic ratios consistent with artificial manipulation, something beyond our current refinement capabilities. One researcher described it as technology expressing itself through chemistry we don't yet understand. But suppose it's all misdirection. Suppose the fragments are byproducts of undisclosed human tech, secret aircraft decades ahead. That argument falters when you look at the physics. Our most advanced aerospace prototypes still rely on combustion, thrust, and air resistance. None demonstrate inertia-free movement or field-induced lift. If a human program mastered that, its existence would rewrite global power dynamics. No adversary would risk revealing such dominance by letting objects roam publicly. Every insider story carries the same emotional undercurrent, mixed with helplessness. Scientists report running tests that violate expectations, then being told to destroy results or transfer them to another office. Some turn bitter, retiring early. Others describe sudden career detours into administrative roles after asking too many questions. No official whistleblower has produced an intact craft, but dozens have described experiencing things that convince them such craft must exist. Skeptics note that human psychology fills voids with grand stories. A lack of explanation breeds myth. That's valid. Yet historians tracking defense research note something peculiar: the funding trail. Each time public attention spikes around alleged retrievals, new research line items appear in defense budgets under obscure titles tied to material sciences or energy field exploration. It's as if rumors themselves redirect policy. Even if non-human tech never existed, the belief in it might have already shaped real technological pursuit. Then comes the question, why bury success if it existed? Ramirez believes it's deliberate. He says the silence isn't just habit, it's strategy. Sudden exposure to technology apparently defying gravity would spark social, religious, and political upheaval. Governments, he claims, prefer slow acclimatization. They hide proof until society's ready to absorb that we're not the top of the ladder anymore. For decades, secrecy worked because evidence stayed compartmented. But leaks are harder to contain in the digital age. Each new statement from credible insiders adds weight to the idea of a global retrieval effort. When legitimate scientists confirm testing exotic materials supplied by unknown sources, public skepticism erodes bit by bit. What was fringe becomes feasible. So where does that leave us? Maybe there are vaults holding fragments of something not born of our planet. Maybe the efforts achieve nothing except myth-making. Either scenario matters, because the first means humanity already possesses technology centuries ahead but can't unlock it, and the second means multiple trained professionals are collectively hallucinating the same pattern. Both reveal limits to what our institutions are willing or able to explain. And whether it's deliberate suppression or simple failure, the stories converge on one haunting theme. Contact already happened, only intelligence agencies were the first to notice. The rest of us are just waiting for permission to believe it, preparing the world for disclosure. By now, a pattern is impossible to ignore. Each new insider, each newly declassified video, each congressional hearing, none of it feels random. It feels sequenced, as if the release of information follows a quiet script whose author nobody will name. John Ramirez claims that script points toward 2027, a date he repeats with guarded precision. He calls it acclimatization. Not confirmation, not contact, acclimatization. Preparing the world for something it isn't ready to confront head-on. Governments don't reveal paradigm-shifting information all at once. They massage reality into gradual acceptance. You can see it in how language changed. UFO was once ridicule. UAP became policy. In the span of 5 years, officials went from denying the phenomenon entirely to public hearings with decorated pilots describing impossible events under oath. That's not disclosure yet, but it's the warm-up act. Look carefully at behavior. In 2017, classified programs were revealed by major media outlets with minimal government pushback. In 2002, the Navy quietly confirmed that the famous videos were indeed authentic. 2 years later, Congress passed legislation establishing permanent investigative offices for UAPs. Suddenly, the subject migrated from late-night talk shows to official policy frameworks. It reads like a slow psychological training exercise, turning unbelievable into simply unusual. Ramirez argues this pacing isn't accidental. People freeze when confronted by absolute unknowns. Mass panic renders governance impossible. If the state really holds proof of non-human technology, the smartest strategy would be to seed acceptance gradually, through entertainment, documentaries, and official hearings that make the extraordinary feel almost bureaucratic. It's social conditioning dressed as transparency. If that sounds conspiratorial, consider how major intelligence agencies already commission pop culture portrayals to steer public sentiment. Why would this topic be any different? Around the same period Ramirez began speaking publicly, the Pentagon accelerated its openness gestures. Acronyms multiplied: UAP Task Force, AOMSG, ARO, each replacing the last within months. On paper, it looked like administrative chaos. Viewed through Ramirez's lens, it was calibration, each rebrand bringing civilians closer to normalizing the idea of non-human presence. Meanwhile, scientific organizations that once shunned the topic began holding symposia under titles like Aerial Phenomena Observations. NASA even launched an independent UAP study team. The message was subtle but clear: this is legitimate to discuss now. Behavioral psychologists involved in government consulting have explained why slow exposure works. You can't drop an existential bomb on an entire species without side effects. Instead, you phase it in: first ridicule, then curiosity, then normalization. The final stage is recognition without shock. Our reaction to the official admission of real UAP footage proved the model. Disbelief quickly turned into memes, not riots. That's precisely the kind of emotional buffering strategists aim for before unveiling anything larger. If Ramirez's timeline is accurate, each new release serves as another psychological milestone. A colonel speaks here, a senator there. News anchors drop fragments of classified wording. Biological remains of non-human origin. Materials not made on Earth. Individually, those phrases feel speculative. Together, they're cumulative desensitization. By 2027, public tolerance for the idea may be high enough that whatever follows, be it unveiling recovered craft, artifacts, or undeniable contact, won't shatter cultural institutions. Humanity will have been rehearsed into belief. The most compelling evidence for this soft disclosure model is how secrecy groups transitioned from total silence to controlled openness. Decades ago, pilots who reported UFOs were grounded. Today, they're invited to brief Congress. The same military structure that once buried data now announces procedural transparency on live TV. That transformation doesn't happen organically. It's policy evolution guided by unseen directives. Ramirez insists certain internal documents reference psychological readiness phases. None have surfaced publicly, but the behavior matches the claim. Religious institutions add another layer. Vatican astronomers have recently spoken of life beyond Earth as theologically compatible. Prominent Muslim and Hindu scholars voice similar openness. Even the New York Times ran think pieces asking how discovery of non-human intelligence might influence global faith. That's new. The coordination looks deliberate. Faith leaders slowly steering followers toward acceptance, preempting the panic Ramirez warns about. Politically, the shift protects credibility. If full disclosure dropped overnight, no government could manage the narrative. Gradual revelation allows officials to say, "We told you along the way." It transforms the unimaginable into the anticipated. It turns revelation into process. Every public briefing, every routine release of declassified footage, reinforces the illusion of control. Skeptics argue we're just seeing coincidence, the natural evolution of transparency in a digital age. Maybe. But coincidences don't usually line up across intelligence agencies, legislative acts, media tone, and religious rhetoric all at once. When generals, physicists, pop culture producers, and theologians start echoing one thematic line, we might not be alone. That's coordination, not accident. It feels like a gentle countdown masked as discovery. Even the entertainment industry plays its part. Network documentaries now feature former intelligence officers as talking heads instead of fringe theorists. Sci-fi blockbusters increasingly portray extraterrestrial contact as benign or enlightening rather than apocalyptic. Cultural motifs shift expectations long before events happen. By the time an official stands at a podium and says, "We have made contact with non-human intelligence," audiences might greet it with curiosity, not fear. Ramirez believes this slow conditioning reflects genuine concern for human stability, not manipulation. He describes 3 stages: acknowledgement of existence, acknowledgement of presence, acknowledgement of interaction. According to him, we're midway through stage 2. That's why officials refer to biological entities and craft of unknown origin, but stop short of naming them. They're easing Earth's population toward the 3rd stage, with 2027 as the psychological tipping point. But why then? Ramirez hints at astronomical alignments or incoming events known to a few insiders. He never elaborates. Others think it's bureaucratic. Perhaps certain classified projects end their non-disclosure periods by that date. Either way, his certainty makes even cautious analysts uncomfortable. Because if he's right, every government communication about UAPs for the next few years will fit neatly into that countdown pattern. There's another angle too. Perhaps disclosure already began, and 2027 marks not an announcement but a transition. Maybe that's when the reality becomes self-evident. Undeniable footage, mass sightings, data leaks impossible to contain. The government wouldn't announce. It would simply confirm what everyone already knows. That scenario aligns perfectly with gradual preparation. The goal isn't revelation but acceptance. Ramirez once said, "People think secrecy hides information. Sometimes it hides timing." Maybe that's the key. Information alone doesn't destabilize societies. Abrupt timing does. So the machine grinds forward, year after year, quietly training a global audience to greet the impossible with composure. If he's mistaken, nothing extraordinary happens in 2027 and humanity keeps looking up, waiting. But if his reading of the internal strategy is correct, then the silence surrounding the phenomenon isn't ignorance anymore. It's choreography. Every public admission, every denial, every strategically placed maybe, becomes part of the same rehearsal script leading towards civilization's moment of composure in the face of the unknown. And when that curtain finally lifts, the audience will already know their lines. The physics that shouldn't exist. If you strip away the sensational headlines and just stare at the data, the real mystery isn't who's flying those objects, it's how they're flying at all. because the numbers don't add up. They never did. The craft observed in verified UAP videos perform movements that, under classical physics, should be lethal to any material, let alone a living pilot. Yet they do them anyway, again and again, on multiple sensors. Something in those recordings defies every line of our engineering handbooks. Start with the basics: motion. Acceleration measures how fast something changes velocity. When you push a jet from 0 to 1,000 miles per hour, every component fights resistance, drag, air pressure, inertia. Push too fast, and the structure tears apart. Our top fighters can handle maybe 9 or 10 GS before systems begin to fail. The craft in the Navy videos? Analysts estimate forces exceeding 10,000 GS, without visible distortion, heat bloom, or shockwave. It's like watching gravity blink. Every known propulsion system produces side effects that sensors pick up. A rocket generates scorching exhaust. A jet leaves ionized trails. Even stealth drones produce turbulence measurable on radar. These things produce none. They simply change position instantly, as if momentum no longer mattered. There's no sonic boom because they may not be interacting with the atmosphere at all. They move more like bubbles in water, displacing space rather than pushing through it. For scientists, that shatters more than equations. It challenges identity, because the laws being violated aren't academic. They're the foundations of our entire civilization's technology. Airplanes, cars, power grids, satellites, all obey Newton. But if these craft operate by bending the very geometry of space around them, we're staring at physics beyond relativity, perhaps exploiting fields we only theorize exist. Luis Elizondo once hinted at how far beyond us that would be. You wouldn't just need a better engine, you'd need a better universe. Engineers dissected radar data, using every model available. Some hypothesized magnetohydrodynamic lift, using electromagnetic fields to push against ionized plasma. But that would demand power outputs rivaling nuclear reactors, not the silent orbs seen skipping across the sky. Others proposed warp field analogs, distort spacetime locally, so the craft moves without acceleration inside its own bubble. On paper it's elegant. In practice, it requires manipulating energies near the theoretical Planck scale. Put simply, it's not just a better aircraft. It's a new relationship with reality. Physicists often describe inertia as the universe's resistance to change. To eliminate it, you'd have to nullify mass itself or reshape the space around that mass. Some believe these. UAPs might generate strong gravitational gradients, effectively surfing distortions they create. Evidence? Radar data revealing pressure drops or ionized air pockets around flight paths. Yet there's no heat trail, suggesting not combustion, but field interaction. If true, the craft's propulsion isn't thrust, it's field alignment, repelling or attracting portions of gravity the way magnets manipulate electrons. One Navy analysis described the craft as exhibiting negative lift signatures, meaning they appeared to fall upward against gravity's pull. That's impossible by our standards, yet multiple sensors confirmed it. Whatever they are, they function more like controlled anomalies than vehicles. The environment bends to them, not the other way around. Now compare our progress. We're experimenting with electromagnetic drives, plasma sails, ion thrusters, each impressive, each producing a few newtons of thrust at best. Even our hypersonic tests, recorded near Mach 10, generate plasma arcs that melt prototypes in seconds. Meanwhile, UAPs register instantaneous jumps measured in tens of miles without thermal damage. If human engineers tried to match that, heat flux alone would vaporize the structure. So how far ahead are we actually talking? Elizondo's estimate of 1,000 years might sound dramatic, but run the math. Our propulsion efficiency doubles roughly every 20 years. To achieve field manipulation consistent with UAP motion, we'd need energy densities 1 trillion times greater than combustion engines can supply. Extrapolate at current innovation rates, it would take roughly a millennium to reach equivalence. His phrase wasn't metaphorical, it was quantitative optimism. Scientists studying the footage note another enigma: direction changes that violate momentum. When the Tic Tac darted sideways, it didn't appear to pivot. It simply teleported several degrees along trajectory, like each frame captured a new position rather than continuous movement. Either the sensors glitched identically across multiple systems, which tests refute, or the object transitions between spatial coordinates without traveling through the intervening space. That's teleportation in practical terms, but in physics, it could mean manipulation of inertial frames, sliding its local space-time reference instantly. Imagine if mass could briefly decouple from gravity. A craft could accelerate without inertial stress because technically, it isn't moving within our frame. The frame itself moves. That concept mirrors the Alcubierre warp hypothesis: contract space in front, expand behind. But where theory demands planetary energy, these craft do it silently, compacted within vehicle-sized volumes. It's absurd, but radar doesn't lie easily. Material science deepens the riddle. Declassified intelligence memos mention isotropic alloys of unknown origin with extreme energy absorbance. Translation: stuff that should melt simply doesn't when hit by directed radiation. If the hulls of UAPs are made from such materials, they could channel or store massive electromagnetic energy, acting as both skin and power source. That could explain the faint radiation halos occasionally reported. Energy bleeding from containment, not combustion waste. Then there's the absence of turbulence. Any object moving at thousands of miles per hour generates shock waves. Water or air ripples violently. Pilots report none. Infrared sensors catch nothing but cold shapes. Cold. That implies either active heat absorption or operation within self-contained fields, isolating them from air friction, much like supercavitation underwater. But these operate in atmosphere and at orbit altitudes. The same principle across mediums hints at cross-environment adaptability. One technology merging air, space, and water transit seamlessly. Skeptics suggest optical illusions, sensor errors, even narrow-angle misreadings. Fair points, until you realize data syncs across visual, radar, and infrared simultaneously. That triple confirmation cuts ordinary error odds to near zero. The burden then flips. Prove how multiple independent instruments hallucinated identical vectors and velocities. No answer fits neatly. What this does to theoretical physics is uncomfortable. It suggests the universe's rules can be played like music, notes struck in combinations we just haven't learned. Quantum mechanics already tells us vacuum energy exists in abundance. Harnessing even a fraction could propel a craft without fuel. Maybe UAPs solved that, drawing power from quantum fluctuations or tapping dimensions predicted by string models. Whatever the mechanism, it's execution, not theory, where humanity lags. Think about societal implications. If such control of gravity and inertia became human capability tomorrow, transportation, energy, even geopolitics would rewrite overnight. Space would shrink to commuter distance, energy scarcity would vanish. That possibility alone explains secrecy. Revealing that someone or something has already achieved it triggers defense panic beyond imagination. Even conservatively, the propulsion signatures appear so far from known tech that reverse engineering may be impossible without reinventing physics first. You can't copy a violin when you've never discovered strings. Scientists might understand fragments, materials that withstand extreme stress, but without knowing how the craft manipulates space-time, they're translating a song without hearing it played. And remember, all of this stems from verified military observations, not rumor. No mythical lights, no grainy camera tricks. Actual radar telemetry confirming behavior that current physics can't reproduce. That means either nature hides a loophole we've missed or someone already mastered it, operating comfortably within it. So maybe Elizondo's 1,000 years ahead benchmark isn't exaggeration, it's humility. Because the deeper researchers look, the more the data seems to whisper a hard truth. These are not mere objects defying physics. They're demonstrations of a physics we don't yet know exists. And if civilization's greatest equations crumble in their presence, then maybe the first step toward understanding them isn't building bigger engines. It's accepting that reality still has secret settings we haven't unlocked. The kind that make gravity optional. The non-human intelligence hypothesis. At a certain point, the conversation stops being about radar returns and acceleration curves and starts being about origin. Because if the UAPs aren't ours and they don't fit known physics, there's only one question left. Who or what built them? Inside intelligence circles, that question divides people into quiet camps. One group leans toward the classic explanation, extraterrestrial. Civilizations old enough to cross stars might easily wield technology that looks like magic to us. Another camp argues these craft aren't visitors but locals, beings sharing our planet in hidden domains, maybe under oceans or dimensions we don't fully perceive. And then there's the strangest minority view, that the phenomena are artificial intelligences, self-created machines exploring reality on their own terms. older than humanity itself. John Ramirez sits somewhere between the first two camps. He believes the intelligence behind these craft isn't human, and may even share biological links with us. In several interviews, he's hinted that human ancestry could involve past interaction with advanced species, what ancient cultures described as gods or sky teachers. When pressed, he uses the term reptilian lineage, claiming some genetic markers might not be entirely terrestrial. It's a claim mainstream science rejects outright, yet it highlights how far some insiders stretch to understand the incomprehensible. Luis Elizondo stays more restrained. He never speculates about species or origins, only observing that data points toward biological remains of non-human origin. In one testimony, he admitted fragments under analysis appeared biologically bonded to mechanical structures, organic and metallic intertwined. He didn't call them aliens, he called them entities. The wording matters. Within intelligent speech, non-human doesn't necessarily mean extraterrestrial. It means not conforming to any known taxonomy. For scientists brought into government programs, that phrasing causes headaches. Non-human intelligence could mean anything: advanced AI networks, extra-dimensional consciousness, even phenomena arising from the universe itself. Yet declassified studies hint that some analysts treat these encounters as interactions rather than observations, implying the objects respond with intention. Pilots describe feeling watched, as though the craft knew it was being tracked. Instruments behave differently when multiple sensors converge, suggesting awareness of detection. Either that's coincidence, or consciousness tied to the object somehow registers our interest. The interdimensional theory tries to explain that awareness. It suggests the craft slipped between branes of spacetime, appearing only when conditions align, like fish breaching an ocean surface. To us it looks like teleportation, to them, it's normal transit. Ramirez calls those entities neighbors behind the wall. He claims ancient myths of shining beings descending from the sky could reflect earlier overlaps of dimensions, moments when their world brushed ours. None of this is provable, but even physicists admit extra-dimensional models exist mathematically. The leap from math to metal isn't large if another intelligence already mastered those equations. Skeptics remind everyone how human imagination fills gaps once evidence runs thin. Ancient astronauts, interstellar visitors, serpent gods. History teems with symbolic archetypes we modernize when facing something new. Still, the overlap between myth and modern radar logs unsettles researchers. Entire civilizations once described flying chariots and luminous discs that moved soundlessly. They wrote of teachers descending from stars to gift knowledge, then vanishing. Were those literary metaphors or early contact accounts viewed through primitive language? Nobody can say, but the recurrence is hard to ignore. Culturally, admitting any non-human source threatens authority structures. Science prefers measurable, repeatable phenomena. Religion guards humanity's cosmic uniqueness. Governments depend on predictability. Accepting an autonomous external intelligence shatters all three pillars at once. That's why even as evidence mounts, officials frame it in neutral terms: anomalous, unidentified, unexplained. Those words buy time. They leave the door cracked without choosing what waits behind it. Yet whispers from classified briefings hint researchers privately use less cautious language. Phrases like sentient vehicles, multi-domain life form, and non-biological operator appear in documents now partially declassified. To those few who've glimpsed them, the craft behave less like machines and more like bodies, reacting, adapting, maybe even healing. One insider described it as biology expressing itself through technology. If that's accurate, our definitions collapse entirely. These aren't ships, they're organisms engineering physics as instinct. The non-human intelligence hypothesis also carries darker implications. If these intelligences truly exist and have monitored Earth for centuries, then secrecy might not be ours alone. Ramirez speculates that governments maintain quiet understanding with them, not treaties but boundaries. We study what we find, they operate where they want. It's a chilling equilibrium that would explain both the frequent sightings and the lack of open confrontation. To skeptics, this sounds like fantasy. To intelligence veterans, it sounds like strategy, mutual non-interference at scale. Psychologists view the public taboo through a different lens. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. Confronting higher intelligence threatens that self-image. Denial becomes defense. So even when credible witnesses describe the unimaginable, society reshapes those accounts into entertainment rather than reckoning. That's why the topic oscillates between ridicule and fascination, our collective mind testing its tolerance for something bigger. Elizondo often says he worries less about what these beings are and more about what they understand about us. Whoever operates these vehicles, he told an interviewer, knows our capabilities, our responses, even our fears. Radar play, where objects approach, vanish, and reappear precisely where pursuers predict, feels almost like teaching moments, not attacks. It's as if they're studying our learning curve. To military analysts, that's unsettling. Interaction without aggression, dominance without destruction. Counter-theories multiply anyway. Some astrophysicists propose time travelers, perhaps future humans returning with evolved technology. Others think naturally occurring phenomena, plasma or atmospheric organisms, could mimic intelligence. None fit all data, but each reflects an attempt to explain intent without invoking alien minds. Meanwhile, inside declassified notes, phrases like controlled response behavior continue to appear, quietly recording patterns nobody wants to discuss aloud. What ties these conflicting ideas together is humility. Every path leads to a limit of human comprehension. Whether the operators are extraterrestrials, interdimensional life, or autonomous machines, they demonstrate mastery of both environment and ourselves. The line between science and spirituality blurs when intelligence surpasses understanding. Suddenly, theology and physics ask the same question. Who made the builders? Ramirez claims that question will soon become unavoidable. He says 2027 isn't about revealing ships, but acknowledging presence. The point when denial collapses under weight of accumulated proof. To skeptics, he's naive. To believers, he's a herald. Either way, his warning resonates. They aren't coming, they're already here. We're the ones arriving. So the next time the night sky ripples and something moves without sound or trail, remember, the real debate isn't if they exist. It's what kind of minds we're looking at, and whether those minds have been looking back far longer than we've noticed. Because if the impossible is already local, the term alien stops meaning distant. It starts meaning next door, attempting to reverse engineer the unknown. Every story about unidentified craft eventually crashes down to the same question. If pieces exist, have we ever figured out how they work? That's where the legend of reverse engineering begins. It's not a single operation. It's a scattered history of scientific frustration, hidden under layers of clearance. The theory goes like this. Somewhere inside defense complexes and contractor labs, there are fragments of technology so advanced our best engineers study them in complete silence, trying to coax secrets from something they barely understand. Witness accounts from former technicians often start the same way, with an unexpected shipment. A sealed container, limited personnel, zero documentation. Inside, slivers of metallic material. Not exotic looking, not glowing, just different. Dense but lightweight, with a texture that seems to resist fingerprints. The teams test conductivity, magnetism, heat tolerance. None of the numbers behave. It's as if the material itself refuses to obey. One metallurgist reportedly said the samples acted alive, expanding microscopically when exposed to specific frequencies, then returning to original dimensions moments later. He thought his instruments malfunctioned. They didn't. When he filed the results, his access was immediately revoked. That reaction, sudden compartmentalization, appears across nearly every witness story. The pattern suggests at least partial confirmation that what they were testing wasn't ordinary. Across the decades, defense analysts have tried nearly every modern technique imaginable. Laser spectroscopy, isotope scanning, magnetic resonance, all aimed at reverse tracing a manufacturing process. But the results contradict one another. Some readings show isotopic ratios not obtainable without massive energy input, hinting that the materials were forged in environments hotter than stellar cores. Others show near-perfect molecular alignment, something no terrestrial smelting process could produce. Each anomaly invites new theories, and each theory crashes against another dead end. Contractors eventually labeled the projects non-reproducible samples, bureaucratic shorthand for "we have no idea." Engineers attempted to heat, cut, and dissolve fragments to observe reactions. They barely changed. Surface oxidation reversed itself within minutes, leaving the samples pristine. Curious, one researcher tried pushing powerful electrical currents through the metal. The resistance fluctuated as though modulated by an external field. He wrote that it felt less like a conductor, more like a participant. Days later, his project shut down. When these fragments couldn't be decoded chemically, scientists turned to physics. Maybe they thought the craft's secret wasn't in material composition but field utilization, gravitational or electromagnetic control systems operating at quantum levels. Lab experiments mimicked what witnesses described: disks hovering over magnet arrays, superconductors producing lift. Still, none came close to matching the acceleration or silence of real sightings. Every prototype consumed massive energy and failed in seconds. Our physics had boundaries the artifacts didn't recognize. The deeper frustration grew, the clearer one truth became. If humanity recovered such technology, comprehension was missing the manual. Reverse engineering assumes shared logic, same math, same constants. But what if their framework operates on a different set entirely? Imagine showing a smartphone to an alchemist. Even understanding electricity, he'd never bridge chemistry to silicon by guesswork. We may be those alchemists now, tinkering at the edges of a science evolved on another timeline. Some researchers whispered that breakthrough required not just study but partnership, communication with the intelligence that built the devices. Ramirez mentioned that idea once, saying that government analysts quietly debated whether progress required permission rather than discovery. The ethics of that thought, asking rather than taking, reveals how alien the problem feels. Rumors persist of limited successes, momentary levitation effects, sudden energy discharges, brief instances where metals lost apparent weight. But every story ends with systems failing, as though the materials deactivate once removed from a specific environment. Engineers compare it to trying to run alien software on incompatible hardware. The code exists, but the operating system doesn't. Inside classified archives, references appear to Project PLEX, Artifact 12, and Advanced Metallurgical Reconstitution. None confirm extraterrestrial origin, yet all mark their findings beyond known technological means. Most documents terminate with the same phrase: further research suspended, insufficient theoretical framework, which might be government language for physics not yet invented. Still, attempts never stop entirely. Each decade, when computing or materials science takes a step forward, someone reopens the vault. Quantum modeling, nanostructure printing, plasma confinement, new toys mean new chances. So far, the result is always déjà vu. Unexplained reactions, unrepeatable demonstrations, swift reclassification. Every failed replication only deepens the mystique, proving that the gulf between observation and understanding remains vast. To explain that gap, some physicists propose that the craft operate using effects analogous to field harmonics, technologies that manipulate fundamental constants temporarily. If true, any fragment disconnected from its controlling field would be inert, a fossil without function. That could explain why recovered materials seem powerless in labs, but miraculous in memory. Without the field, they're just puzzle pieces with no context. Others counter that these stories survive precisely because failure breeds myth. A secret project tests an advanced alloy. Results disappoint. Rumor fills the void. Yet, even skeptics concede strange coincidences. Whenever one of these rumors surfaces, patent filings suddenly appear for theoretical propulsion methods eerily similar to declassified descriptions: microwave cavity drives, superconducting rings, warp field generators. Technology chases myth as if trying to catch its own shadow. Luis Elizondo once hinted that reverse engineering might be impossible not because it's beyond us, but because it resists translation. The systems, he said, may integrate physical law and consciousness. The operator isn't separated from the machine. If that's true, deconstructing one without understanding the other would be like dissecting a brain to study thought. The function dies with the separation. Even the best-funded private efforts mirror that frustration. Aerospace giants reportedly poured millions into analyzing unidentified alloys, only to abandon projects after inconclusive years. Investors call it sunk cost. Scientists call it epistemological failure, the limits of knowing anything outside one's paradigm. As one internal memo allegedly put it, we're staring through a keyhole at a cathedral. Skeptics still argue none of this requires alien origin. Advanced composites, metamaterials, classified drone tech, all plausible. But they can't explain eyewitness recordings where entire craft redirect at impossible speeds or submerge without resistance. Recreating that requires controlling gravity or inertia, skills humanity doesn't have. The mismatch keeps the reverse engineering myth alive because it feels like more than myth. It feels like evidence of unreachable potential taunting every engineer who glimpses it. In interviews, Ramirez frames those failures philosophically. Maybe the question isn't can we build it, he said, but should we? That sentiment divides insiders. Half chase comprehension to protect national advantage. The other half fear unlocking forces we aren't mature enough to wield. When technology leaps ahead of ethics, history writes tragedies, not triumphs. After all these years, progress remains rumored but unseen. Every lab hit the same wall. No method to replicate the energy source, no proven understanding of control systems, no openly acknowledged success. The projects fade, resurfacing only when new physics promises a different approach. Each reappearance feels like humanity knocking again on a door that won't open. And with every closure, the question grows heavier. What if that door isn't locked, but alive, waiting for us to evolve enough to recognize the handle? Because each failed experiment, each vanished report, whispers the same message underneath the bureaucratic noise. The technology exists, but it won't answer the wrong questions. Until we learn the right ones, we'll keep staring into the metallic fragments of an intelligence 1,000 years ahead, holding clues that glint like mirrors, reflecting not aliens, but the gaping frontier between what we know and what we're still too human to understand. The disclosure tug-of-war. For every insider demanding transparency, there's another voice warning that the truth could destabilize civilization. That push and pull between revelation and restraint defines the modern disclosure battle. It's not fought with armies or weapons, but with briefings, leaks, and silence. Each side claims to protect humanity. Each believes the other is reckless. On one end, you have whistleblowers like Elizondo and Ramirez, people who say the public has the right to know. Behind them stand senators, journalists, and a growing faction of scientists insisting that secrecy only feeds distrust. On the other, shadowed agencies and defense officials argue that complete exposure would hand adversaries priceless intelligence and perhaps crush public confidence in institutions. The result is an elaborate stalemate, truth struggling through tightening fingers. The tug-of-war plays out in subtle acts. Documents vanish from archives within days of requests. Terminology changes just enough to reset search parameters. Programs shut down only to reappear under new acronyms. It's institutional sleight of hand, designed to maintain plausible deniability while appearing cooperative. ARO replaces the UAP task force. Committees form, hold one televised hearing, then drift into classified recess. To outsiders, that looks like progress. Insiders call it motion without movement. Luis Elizondo has described this resistance in careful language. He says certain officials see the phenomenon as more than a security issue. It's a control issue. Who gets to define reality? He once asked. If the government admits non-human technology operates here, every military advantage becomes irrelevant overnight. Aircraft carrier fleets, nuclear deterrence, stealth systems, all rendered prehistoric by something moving faster than physics should allow. No superpower wants to acknowledge strategic helplessness. Meanwhile, political pressure mounts. Members of Congress receive classified briefings that reportedly leave them deeply concerned. One senator told aides he couldn't sleep after seeing certain images. Yet once outside secure rooms, they revert to vagueness. They say objects of unknown origin instead of craft, anomalous capabilities instead of propulsion. The language dilutes urgency into ambiguity. It's disclosure by erosion, truth leaking in fragments too small to threaten order. Public reaction fuels both sides. When government footage first surfaced, some viewers shrugged, others panicked, and conspiracy markets exploded. To intelligence managers, that chaos justified further secrecy. If people misinterpret leaks, better to restrict them altogether. And to journalists chasing verification, those same blocks prove concealment. The paradox feeds itself. Every denial sounds suspicious. Every revelation sounds incomplete. Then there's religion, the unspoken variable. Even minor hints of non-human intelligence force reevaluation of centuries-old belief systems. Internal church memos, later authenticated by reporters, show faith leaders requesting advanced notice of potential confirmation events to prepare congregations. Governments oblige because spiritual unrest can become political unrest. For bureaucrats balancing stability, slow disclosure isn't cowardice, it's crisis management. But silencing believers is harder in the digital age. Pilots upload footage. Contractors post vague anecdotes on job forums. Whistleblowers testify under new legal protections. Each leak triggers official rebuttals. Each rebuttal inspires new suspicion. The battlefield becomes narrative, not evidence. One side wields classification, the other, public attention. Media networks turn the struggle into spectacle. Talk shows invite retired admirals who publicly deny the phenomenon, yet privately request unedited radar clips. A newspaper prints a line from a redacted report, then receives legal warnings by dawn. Even within journalism, editors debate responsibility. Reveal too much without proof, and credibility shatters. Reveal too little, and history accuses you of complicity. It's the same ethical tension intelligence officers face daily, only in headlines instead of vaults. Ramirez frames it differently. He says disclosure isn't a battle of truth, but of timing. According to him, internal factions agree contact acknowledgement is inevitable. The disagreement lies in when society can absorb it. One camp wants immediate exposure, rip off the bandage. The other believes humanity's emotional immune system will reject it like a transplant. So both groups push and stall, turning information flow into negotiation rather than revelation. You can see those negotiations in miniature after every hearing. Lawmakers demand transparency. Agencies promise further study. Deadlines pass, new committees form. Classified annexes expand while public briefings shrink. It's choreography, each step forward balanced by retreat. Controlled acceleration, one defense analyst called it, likening it to handling an unstable reactor. Release energy too fast, and you melt everything. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens piece together patterns from scraps, redacted reports, freedom of information leftovers, whistleblower interviews, and realize the puzzle, though incomplete, depicts something massive. Once people sense a hidden truth, secrecy loses legitimacy. The government risks credibility collapse if it continues, yet also risks strategic collapse if it doesn't. The rope tightens from both ends. That's when suppression turns personal. Elizondo describes losing clearances, being labeled a rogue employee. Ramirez faces online smears and sudden character reviews. Others experience job terminations after anonymous complaints. Officially, none of it connects to disclosure. Unofficially, it keeps potential witnesses quiet. Careers become cautionary tales for anyone tempted to speak. Despite that, cracks widen. In 2023 legislative sessions, lawmakers forced intelligence agencies to identify all programs dealing with retrieval or analysis of anomalous materials. It was unprecedented oversight, but still tiptoed around naming who holds what. Skeptics interpret the caution as absence of evidence. Supporters call it confirmation hidden in process language. When governments invent new vocabulary to avoid old truths, that invention becomes proof in itself. Abroad, allies mimic the pattern. Britain releases once classified Ministry of Defense files while admitting many were purged for storage reasons. Brazil declassifies decades of pilot reports yet redacts technical analyses. Each nation dangles fragments, enough to appear open without relinquishing strategic mystery. Disclosure, it turns out, is a global balancing act. Everyone wanting the truth revealed, but preferably by somebody else first. Then there's the public psychology shift. Younger generations treat UAP talk like standard news, not taboo. Leaked footage goes viral faster than agencies can label it. Denial now breeds more curiosity than calm, making old suppression methods obsolete. Governments trained to control scarcity of information now face oversupply. Every silence amplifies rumor. In that environment, transparency stops being optional. It becomes survival strategy for credibility. Still, absolute openness remains off limits. There are national security clauses, corporate contracts, religious concerns, and the deeper fear. What if confirmation triggers collapse of scientific authority itself? If humanity sees demonstrable proof of higher intelligence operating beyond physics, every schoolbook, every theory, every hierarchy wobbles. Bureaucracies built on predictability prefer mystery to madness. So they stall, hoping acclimatization outruns evidence. That's the tug of war in its purest form, the unstoppable curiosity of a connected world pulling against the immovable caution of old power. Every hearing, every leaked page, every statement we cannot confirm or deny is another yard gained or lost. Somewhere in that strain lies the future shape of disclosure. Not a single revelation, but a gradual surrender to the obvious. Because secrets this large don't stay buried forever. They only wait until the cost of hiding outweighs the fear of knowing. And judging by the noise building from both ends of the rope, that moment may already be tearing through the silence. What if they're right? Picture both men, Ramirez with his timelines and Elizondo with his data, sitting across from each other in a quiet room. No theatrics, no lights, just years of classified experience condensed into 2 sentences. It's not human, and it's far beyond us. Stripped of speculation, that's the essence. And it raises the simplest, most jarring question imaginable. What if they're right? If UAPs truly embody technology a millennium ahead, then history hasn't been linear. It's been parallel. Somewhere, another intelligence graduated from combustion long before we learned to split atoms. They conquered gravity while we still struggle to cross oceans efficiently. It's humbling, but also clarifying. Everything we call progress might just be catching up to someone else's old homework. Consider social impact first. Religions built on human centrality would face abrupt reinterpretation. Sermons would compete with press briefings. Some believers would see cosmic neighbors as divine affirmation, others as existential threat. Governments would scramble to preserve calm, insisting these beings, whoever they are, mean no harm. But faith runs deeper than policy. Overnight, billions of people would re-examine the story of creation through a new lens, one that doesn't place us at the center. Economically, the cascade would be brutal. Oil, aviation, even space industries could collapse if propulsion that bends gravity becomes public. Energy scarcity, the cornerstone of global power, would evaporate. Entire markets, from fossil fuel to aerospace, would pivot or perish. The first nation able to adapt the technology, if adaptation were even possible, would hold supremacy unmatched in human history. That alone explains the obsession with secrecy. Whoever figures out the drive controls not airspace, but the shape of civilization itself. Culturally, ambiguity might save us. Belief trickling in through slow disclosure, hearings, footage, insider chatter, already softens impact. When confirmation drops, shock won't come from existence, but from detail. Their real is digestible. They've been here all along is harder. The first statement expands imagination. The second throttles certainty. And yet, that second one is the one these insiders hint at most. Psychologists warn that when paradigms shatter, denial often masquerades as calm. People resume daily routines while reality silently rearranges underneath. Think of how society reacted to the first atomic explosion. Awe, then numb normalcy. Something similar would happen here. We'd preach readiness, but secretly fear what readiness reveals. That our self-image as apex intelligence was provincial fantasy. Philosophically, it might be the most unifying crisis ever. Rival nations suddenly see themselves on the same team, Team Human, facing intellects operating on different rules. Global politics could pivot from competition to collective defense or curiosity. Imagine a United Nations conference not about climate or war, but about contact protocol. Languages would need new words. Ethics would need new boundaries. The technological implications cut deeper still. If gravity and inertia can be controlled, space becomes local terrain. Mars isn't a generation away, it's Tuesday. The energy demands sustaining 8 billion lives would vanish. Disease eradication, transport, communications, all would transform. But here's the darker mirror. Those same capabilities could weaponize effortlessly. Field distortion isn't limited to travel. It's capable of erasing impact entirely, kinetic, thermal, or nuclear. The technology that ends scarcity could also end resistance. Any government holding it could rule silently, absolutely. So perhaps the real fear isn't aliens. It's us with their toys. Ramirez hinted at that moral chasm when he asked if humanity's psychological maturity matches its curiosity. History suggests not. Every major discovery, fire, gunpowder, atomic fission, arrived before ethics caught up. If civilization receives propulsion that bends space-time, conquest may follow enlightenment by mere weeks. Maybe that's why secrecy persists, to delay disaster as much as panic. Yet optimism lingers. If those technologies demonstrate conscious restraint, no invasions, no obliterations, maybe intelligence and empathy can coexist at advanced levels. The look but don't touch behavior of UAPs could be proof of ethical superiority, a kind of cosmic quarantine until we outgrow aggression. Elizondo once mused that whoever operates these craft understands fear as well as physics. Maybe observation is diplomacy. Study us, judge readiness, decide intervention later. Imagine then disclosure day. A podium, flanked by flags, an official clearing his throat before uttering words generations mocked. We are not alone. Cameras flash, networks translate, religions freeze mid-sentence. In that instant, civilization becomes pre- and post-contact. Not because of threat, but because certainty dies. We finally know, and knowledge doesn't care about comfort. There will be chaos. Markets will convulse. Conspiracy boards will explode. Artists will paint the first portraits of the unknown. But after panic fades, curiosity returns. Maybe that's the point of gradual exposure all along, to let awe overwhelm terror. Because once fear subsides, cooperation begins. Scientists worldwide would form alliances overnight. Data sharing would replace espionage. Humanity's search for meaning would shift from inward to outward. Still, one unsettling possibility remains. What if confirmation doesn't deliver disclosure? What if the revelation is that contact already governs us quietly? Ramirez's psychological preparation might not precede an event, it might conclude it. Instead of grand arrival, we realize influence was always embedded in progress. Whispered guidance, nudged innovation, subtle architecture steering species evolution. The 1,000-year gap suddenly looks like mentorship by design. But think practically. Every law of economics, science, and politics relies on control. Introduce a power that makes gravity optional, and control dissolves. That's the existential danger for those managing secrecy. Once the public grasps that hierarchy means nothing to a craft that outruns missiles, authority redefines itself. Leaders become interpreters rather than rulers. Maybe that's the transformation both men anticipated. Not apocalypse, but humility institutionalized. So what if they're right? Then humanity stands not at the edge of discovery, but at its reflection. The unknown isn't threatening us, it's inviting us forward. One classified document, one blurred video at a time. Whether we accept the invitation responsibly or destructively depends on whether curiosity can finally eclipse ego. And if Ramirez's countdown reaches its mark, if Elizondo's evidence holds, we may soon learn that revelation isn't waiting in the sky. It's been hovering, invisible, for someone brave enough to look up and admit what they already feel in their bones. The universe has been answering all along. Maybe disclosure already started, quietly, somewhere between rumor and reality. Because whichever way you tilt the evidence, one truth keeps surfacing. Our understanding of the universe is primitive. The insiders never demand belief, they demand curiosity. Ramirez warns that preparation is psychological. Elizondo insists comprehension is survival. Both describe a gulf between human limits and something operating effortlessly beyond them. A reminder that the horizon of knowledge still curves far past our instruments. Think about what survives every contradiction in their testimonies. The physics, impossible yet measured. The secrecy, denied yet proven by omission. Even skepticism unintentionally confirms the mystery's weight. If nothing extraordinary existed, the effort to hide it wouldn't need this much infrastructure. Somewhere behind layers of acronyms and classified labs, people are wrestling with technologies that make gravity optional. Whether their source is extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or entirely terrestrial but ancient, the challenge is the same: facing proof that our laws of motion aren't final. Human progress has always been filtered through disbelief. Fire, flight, fusion, each looked like heresy before utility. Maybe this phenomenon is just the next correction in cosmic humility. We keep expecting revelation to arrive with a landing light, forgetting that discovery has never asked for our permission. It simply appears, forcing adaptation. Ramirez's timeline and Elizondo's data are different languages describing one warning. The extraordinary isn't coming. It's already integrated into the background noise of normal life. The real countdown is how long it takes us to notice. There's a haunting wisdom in the restraint shown by whatever intelligence might operate here. If it wanted domination, it had centuries. Instead, it waits. Maybe observation is invitation. Watch them, measure fear, test empathy. That patience suggests sophistication we barely comprehend. Perhaps 1,000 years ahead isn't just technological distance, but emotional maturity measured in restraint. Governments will keep rationing the impossible, presenting pieces that fit current psychology. Scientists will analyze anomalies until equations blink. Religious thinkers will draft doctrines broad enough for new neighbors. And ordinary people will keep glancing upward, half hoping those silent lights will draw closer next time. That's disclosure in practice, not a single announcement, but a collective awakening spread across moments of wonder. So where does that leave us? Balance between terror and curiosity, staring into data that undermines arrogance. If these craft represent reality's advanced settings, then understanding them means growing into the kind of species worthy of that knowledge. Maybe the point isn't to capture the technology, but to evolve toward the mindset that built it. Humanity's next invention might not be propulsion, it might be perspective. Because readiness isn't measured by weapon count or energy output. It's measured by how we handle truth that stares back without hostility. The question isn't if they're watching, it's whether we're finally watching ourselves clearly. That's the real disclosure, the mirror moment when ignorance collapses into maturity. And if they truly are 1,000 years ahead, maybe they've been waiting for us to realize that progress isn't closing the distance to them. It's closing the distance between who we are and who we could become.